Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the 1 Year Bible Journey, week 33. Man, I can't believe how fast this year is going by. This has been a lot of work for all of us, but what a journey it's been, and I'm glad you're still with me. Week 33, the 1 Year Bible Journey, especially for beginners. I'm Pastor Cary. This is Growing in the Gospel. Now, if you're new, there's a couple things I want to say. First of all, you got to go to the channel and look at the playlists, okay? And that's not the easiest thing to do on YouTube. But the playlist, the 1 Year Bible Journey, has up to this point now 66 videos, an Old Testament video and a New Testament video for 33 weeks of the year. We've come all the way up to Proverbs and all the way up to 2 Corinthians. The bulk of Scripture is behind us. But if you're new and you've started the journey kind of halfway through or whatever, that's fine. I just want you to know the whole playlist is there. All the material is there, and we have covered a lot of ground, and this has become a robust resource for you. In addition to that, there are many other studies on the playlists on this channel. There's the Done book, What Most Religions Never Tell You. There's the entire book of Revelation. Right now we're going through the Gospel of John. That's posting on Sundays. We've done other topical series and studies. So I want to encourage you to, and many Psalms playlists. So what we're doing is Monday, Tuesday, the 1 Year Bible Journey. Wednesday through Friday, we're slow walking through the Psalms. And we are at about Psalm 130 or 31 right now. We're in our 5th year on the Psalms, and all those playlists are linked on the channel. Some of them are on a previous YouTube channel because Growing in the Gospel is a newer channel. But they're all linked here. And then Saturday, presently, as I'm recording this video, we're doing Family Matters, 8 Habits of Happy Homes. So a lot of biblical material, resources, and instructions for you on this channel. Why? Because my call is to teach the Bible, to pastor a local church, and I love to teach in writing and in video and in audio and in whatever form I can. And I'm trying to do this on this channel as a ministry to you, to bless you. And so many of you are a part of this channel on a regular basis, and you've kind of become a part of the family. Thank you. Some of you even are helping to support this channel and to grow it, and that's a blessing, and I appreciate that. Many of you have become a part of Emmanuel, and you're investing and giving at Emmanuel and through Emmanuel, and God's bringing a great harvest in New England and around the world because you're a part of our family. So thank you for taking the journey with us. Okay, let's talk about our reading for this week. So in the Old Testament, Proverbs 11 through 30, we talked about that yesterday. In the New Testament this week, 2 Corinthians 6 through 10. So you have 5 chapters in 2 Corinthians. This is not going to be a difficult reading. It's not long, but we're going to talk through it. Now, last week, we laid the foundation for 2 Corinthians. We told the story behind the letter. This is perhaps it's at least his 3rd letter to Corinthians, even though we know it as 2 Corinthians. There's one letter we for sure don't have, but there may be 2 letters we don't have. So this could be his 4th letter and final letter. And this is the happy letter, okay? Now, he's still cleaning up some problems. There's still some resistors in the church, but for the most part, by the time he's writing this letter, he has received news from Titus that the church has received his corrections and rebukes from the first letter, 1 Corinthians, and that Titus has gone and brought about and fostered reconciliation. He has rebuked the dissenters and the false teachers and the troublemakers. He has fostered the restoration of the man that was committing open immorality and incest with his stepmother. He has resolved problems and challenges and issues, conflicts in the church, and their big conflict with the Apostle Paul, the rejection of him, and he's mended all that. And Paul and Titus have now met up in Philippi on the 3rd missionary journey. Paul is distraught over the trouble at Corinth and his broken relationship with them, and he gets good news from Titus that the relationship has been mended, and that's why he writes 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians has 7 sections, with the introduction and conclusion being 2. There's 5 middle sections. There's explanations of his travel plans and his delay in being able to visit them. He's planning a visit, and how to restore the man that was committing incest, who's now repentant. And that's chapters 1 and early part of 2. Chapter 2 through 6 is Paul defending his ministry and giving us, by the way, a lot of instruction about biblical New Testament ministry at the same time. It's really cool because it's all given for a reason of defense to validate the sincerity and the authenticity of his ministry among them. And after he left, he's really defending himself against false narratives that have come into Corinth about him and discredited him. And he's reestablishing his teaching credibility with them that others have destroyed. But while he's doing that, in chapters 2 to 6, he's teaching us an enormous amount of things about the Christian life and Christian ministry. Chapter 6, 11, 12-ish through 7, 16, Paul is exhorting the church and asking them to open their hearts to him and to continue to separate from those that are making trouble. We're going to talk about more of this in a minute. Chapters 8 and 9, he's really teaching them about giving because he's about to visit Corinth. He's making his rounds through the churches in Greece, and he's visiting all these churches one more time. And at every church, he's receiving an offering for the suffering Christians at Jerusalem. And he is adding to his party a couple of people from each church. And he's building an entourage. And he's going to leave Corinth having received an offering and added some people to the church. He's going to go with this group of people across the Aegean Sea. He's going to stop at Ephesus and visit those elders and that church and weep with them and say goodbye to them. And then he's going to go to Jerusalem and give them the offering from all the churches of the Gentiles. It's really a precious thing. And that's where he's going to be arrested in Jerusalem and imprisoned at Caesarea for 2 years, and then find his way to Rome and be in house arrest in Rome for 2 years. So this is his last journey, and this is his last letter to Corinth. And the tone, it's very personal. It's a bit disjointed in terms of bouncing around from topic to topic. He's bearing his heart. He tells a lot of his side of the story about his anguish over the distress between them, the broken relationship between him and the church. And he speaks a lot about that story. Chapters 10 through 13, he vindicates his authority as an apostle and as a leader in the churches. And there's another bit of defense there. And then he closes out the letter in chapter 13. So you already read chapters 1 through 5 last week. And so we're just going to highlight very quickly chapters 6 through 10. And again, I don't think we're going to be very long today because I've already pretty much talked through this book. So the big picture of this book, and again, I keep wanting to point to the gospel. The gospel is in this book all throughout in Paul's instruction. But I want you to see the big picture is that this is the story behind this letter is the story of a man and a great church that was born in the book of Acts 17 and 18. And then there was some time gap, and the church descended into difficulty and conflict and problems. And so then the man Paul wrote a letter of correction and sent Timothy to make things right, and that didn't go well. So it's a church that fell off the rails and became crazy church, problem church. We can identify with this because it's problems in churches are quite common, and they have been since the beginning. Many of the New Testament epistles are written to resolve problems in churches, which comforts me because the church has always been the church of Jesus that he's building. It's always been the people of God and the family of God, but it's always been sort of a problematic thing too. And every now and then I talk to Christians, they're like, I don't go to church because I can't be with all those hypocrites, and I got hurt at church, and church is this and church is that. You know what? I just want to say, grow up. I got hurt at church. I got hurt at every church I ever attended. I mean, that's just church. Jesus is still at work in churches. Jesus is still doing his work through the church. He uses imperfect people in imperfect churches, in imperfect settings, with imperfect ministries to do beautiful work. That's how it works. And when we give up on that model, we're giving up on the plan of God. Jesus didn't give up on the church. Have you ever thought about this? Jesus got up and went to Sabbath synagogue every week of his life. and he worshiped, and he heard the scriptures, and he was taught. And at the end, he did the teaching. But he was sitting there with people who didn't even believe him, didn't even believe in him. They were worshiping their system. Here he is, God in the flesh, going to church, quote unquote, with people that aren't even really believers. But he still did it. He still enjoyed community with those people and enjoyed worship and learned and grew and read scriptures and heard teaching. He's the Messiah. He's the God-man. But he still went to the community of God's people, imperfect people. So if Jesus did, then I certainly should, if I can. Okay, I'm not talking about physical inability. I'm simply saying that the church is a flawed human reality, but it's a beautiful entity as well that Jesus is working through and still building. And the story of Corinth shows us the long view of church stories, and that is that the gospel, the Spirit of God, and faithful leadership foster reconciliation. Paul patiently waited and cultivated and continued aiming at relational reconciliation with this church. He could not control their responses. He could not control and force or legislate reconciliation. He needed to foster it. He needed to wait on it. He needed to cultivate it. He needed some mediators, some people to go between and mediate and diplomatically foster towards reconciliation. And sometimes we need that kind of thing too. But my point is that the gospel held this church even through its problems, and held Paul even through his disappointment in the brokenness. And eventually Jesus brought them back together. And one thing I've learned, I'm 55 as the recording of this video, and I've been a Christian follower of Jesus now, imperfectly so, for 47 years. And what I can tell you is God writes long stories. And I've experienced broken relationships and fractured relationships and bruised relationships. And I've been hurt by people, and I've probably hurt people in ways I did not intend to. But I can tell you this, as I've aged, there's not a single living person on the planet, living or dead for that matter, that I am not and was not open-hearted to foster reconciliation where there could be and when there could be. There's not a single living person that I wouldn't hug their neck, ask forgiveness, seek and to give and extend forgiveness. Reconciliation is just embedded into the gospel. And as followers of God, we have to be open to that. Otherwise, we're not an accurate reflection of the gospel. So I love the fact that this book demonstrates reconciliation and a renewal of a relationship. And then Paul is going to visit this church, and the offering he's going to talk about is going to be received successfully, and the relationship is going to be closed well. Paul's going to take that offering to Jerusalem, and he's going to end his ministry with a good relationship with the people at Corinth. And that's the real story behind this letter, is that this is a healing letter. This is a repairing letter. It's a good, I'm glad we're okay kind of letter. God was honored at the end of the story. Paul was okay, and the church was strengthened, and together they blessed suffering believers back in Jerusalem. So very quickly, in chapter 6, Paul again is vindicating his ministry, and he's also giving instructions on not being unequally yoked with unbelievers. Chapter 7, Paul is sharing how the Corinthian story unfolded on his experience, his emotions. Chapters 8 and 9 are powerful. These are teachings on giving, and it's two of the most important chapters in the New Testament about giving. And I'm going to read through, I preached a message on these two chapters back in 2021 in a series, and this would be on our church website if you'd like it, and I'll probably use it on the channel at some point. It's called The Kingdom Life. And I called it Kingdom Investments, How the Gospel Transforms Possessors into Investors, and how that we're called really as God's people to use a portion of his gifts and his provision to us to bless his kingdom, primarily through his church. And we call it grace giving because it's not obligatory. We're not earning our salvation. We're not trying to stay saved by paying off our debt. We don't owe God anything, though he is worthy of it. And he calls us to give to set our hearts free from greed and from the idolatry of believing that money is really our source of stability. We need to see him as our provider. And so when we give him the first fruits, as Proverbs 3 tells us to do, we are expressing trust in God as our provider. And I believe this, I've never given less than 10% of my income to the Lord. Since I have been old enough to think about it and have any income stream, and especially as a young man, being married, Dana and I, we've committed 10% and usually more than 10%. I would say over the last 20 years, we've given between 12 and 20% of our income year to year, just depending on a particular year. So it's kind of like Paul said, I know how to abound, I know how to be abased, but in all things, I'm going to live in contentment. So some years are better than others, and yet we've tried to continually invest through our local church, and we love to give at Emmanuel, and we've just learned that God does more with our less. In other words, when we honor God first, I don't even calculate. I don't even do the bills and then give God the leftovers. I give to God first, and then I look at the bills and the needs, and I make it all work, or God makes it all work. So here's the list of things you're going to read about grace giving in chapters 8 and 9 that I share with our church family. Grace giving overflows from God's unfolding kindness. It joyfully abounds, even from hardship. It comes always from willing hearts. It is surprisingly delighted and eager. It's a joyful kind of giving. It's anticipatory. It enjoys it. It likes to give. It is never pressured, and it always validates a sincere love for Jesus. You know you love God when you want to give to him, because loving is giving, and love produces a desire to give. So you can give without loving, but you can't love without giving. That's just how it goes. So when you truly love, your heart is going to have a desire to give. Next, grace giving always reflects the gospel, because God so loved the world that he gave. Grace giving activates good intentions from God's supply. God is the provider, and we're the activator. We're the ones who take his resources and activate them for his kingdom purposes. Grace giving is individual. It's not comparative. So in other words, it's not equal giving. You're never compared to other people. You're to give from what God has provided for you. It is never intended to be burdensome. God never expects you to give what he doesn't first put into your hands. It's not intended to be a burden. Next, grace giving is to be stewarded with integrity. In other words, those that receive the gifts should honorably handle those gifts. Next, grace giving encourages others. The example encourages others to be generous. You become an example of, look, God, I'm giving and God's providing for me, and he'll provide for you too. Grace giving desires to give more bountifully. It looks for ways to increase giving and to multiply resources for kingdom purposes and kingdom investment. I have some friends that they give far more than 20% of their income because they have figured out how to make money, how to multiply resources, and they love to invest into kingdom purposes. So it looks for ways to be more bountiful. Grace giving is purposeful, cheerful, free, and unburdened. It's light. Grace giving is partnered with an infinite supply line. You will never outgive God. You get yourself in the lane of giving, you are aligning yourself with God, who will always provide for you to give. Okay? Now, it's not a trade. You don't say, God, I'll give, so you give me enough money to buy that new car that I want. That's not how it works. You say, God, I'm going to seek first your kingdom, and God says, and I'm going to make sure that all the things you need are added to you. And he's also going to make sure you have enough to give. It's really, really cool how that works. Number 15, grace giving produces joy and growth and gratefulness. So this is all the principles that flow in chapters 8 and 9. In chapter 9, you're going to continue reading the giving, and then chapter 10, you're going to begin reading Paul's defense of his leadership authority, his apostolic authority. So a great book, a great letter out of a great redemptive reconciling story of Paul and the church at Corinth, and a lot of wonderful instruction for our lives operationally, spiritually today. So as always, I love to read your comments. I hope you share with me what you're learning, how God is teaching you. And I encourage you on this giving thing, if God has convicted you, jump in with us at Emmanuel. We are investing into kingdom purposes in New England and around the world through missions, through church planting, and God's blessing in a wonderful way. And we have a wonderful team of financial minds. We have an outside accounting firm that handles all of our books. So we are very serious and sober-minded about stewarding the gifts of God's people for the kingdom of Jesus. And we're faithful in that. We have a good best practices structure to make sure that every dollar is well accounted for and well invested. But if you have a local church, I would say, hey, start there. Invest in and through your own local church. So thank you for joining me for today. My friend, you have completed 33 weeks in the one-year Bible journey, and we're pressing forward to week 52. I've got a list of all the weeks here, and on my screen, it's the first time I can, in one screenshot, see the remaining weeks. Week 34 to week 52 are all right there. There's a lot of study and a lot of notes to fill in on these blank placeholders. But we have a great journey ahead coming into the rest of the summer and the fall, or whatever time of year you're watching these videos. I rejoice to interact with you and love your feedback. Let's press forward. We're this close to the end, and so there's no turning back now. I'm praying for you all. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.